All right, let's get into this because it's a wild one. We're going to untangle the incredibly messy story of Katie Hudkins and Patrick McDonald. Now, this is a couple whose entire journey seems to be written in court filings and business disputes, rather than love letters. It's a real saga of ambition, constant conflict, and a partnership that went from fighting side by side in court to fighting each other. And right here, this is where the whole story just flips on its head. Look at this. From 2022 to 2024, they were a team, co-plaintiffs, taking on the world together in court. But then, bam, fast forward to 2026, and they're petitioner versus respondent. They're on opposite sides of a divorce. So what on earth happened? How do you go from partners in litigation to adversaries in life, seemingly overnight? So yeah, let's talk about the breakup. The official moment, the day the dam broke, was January 9th, 2026. That's the day Patrick McDonald filed for divorce. And just like that, their very intertwined, very public partnership came to a screeching legal halt. But before that split, you have to understand, their story was all about unity, at least at the courthouse. This couple seemed to be constantly in litigation, launching one lawsuit after another to protect and expand what they were building as a shared business empire. And you can see just how deep this went. I mean, they were co-plaintiffs in a pretty nasty property dispute that started back in 2022. Then, just a little over a year before the divorce filing, they and their main company, Treetop Village, sued their landlord. They were literally fighting shoulder to shoulder in court, right up until the very end. And all of that legal action, it was all built on this foundation of shared businesses. Hudkins and McDonald didn't just have one company. They created this whole network of them, dipping their toes into everything from childcare and construction to restaurants and bars. This table really lays out the scope of what they were trying to build. You've got their big one, Treetop Village, plus Easton Construction. But take a closer look at those filing statuses. Delinquent, administratively dissolved. These are some pretty big red flags. It suggests this wasn't just one business hitting a rough patch. It looks more like a pattern of instability that was just following them from one venture to the next. And the cracks in their empire really started to show with their main business, Treetop Village. What was supposed to be this ambitious childcare venture just got completely bogged down in public fights and very public failures. At first, though, it looked like a massive success story in the making. They actually secured a huge state grant. We're talking almost $500,000 to expand into Port Orchard. With that kind of cash and official backing, this was supposed to be their crowning achievement. But the whole project just fell apart. The official story is that the building was a disaster. A structural engineer apparently found that the heating units were literally sinking through the roof, making the whole place unsafe. So this massive failure didn't just kill the expansion, it of course kicked off yet another lawsuit with them suing the landlord. And while that expansion was imploding, their original location in Bremerton was getting absolutely hammered with public criticism. I mean, just read this review from the Better Business Bureau. It's not just about bad service, it's alleging verbal abuse and even that a child was physically harmed. And the allegations just get more and more disturbing. This review claims an infant was severely underfed for an entire day, sent home with 3 full bottles untouched. I mean, these are incredibly serious accusations of neglect. So this is the real puzzle, right? On one side, you have these horrifying detailed complaints from the public. But on the other, you have official state monitoring reports from the Department of Children, Youth, and Families from that same time period, showing the place was passing its safety and compliance checks. It's a tale of 2 completely different realities. How can both be true? And while all this public drama was unfolding, there were clear signs the business was in financial trouble. The state of Washington had to file tax warrants against Treetop Village twice, once in 2018 and again in 2024. That tells you they weren't paying their taxes and the financial pressure was building. And that's the key thing to understand here. This chaos, it's not new. If you rewind the clock, you find that financial trouble and legal fights have been a constant theme for them, both together and separately for more than a decade. This timeline just lays out the whiplash. Look at this. It starts with a massive financial judgment against Hudkins way back in 2008. Then, in 2017, a domestic violence petition. Then they do a complete 180 and become legal partners for a couple of years. And then it all comes crashing down with the divorce in 2026. It's an absolutely volatile trajectory. Just let that number sink in for a second. $22.6 million. That was the final judgment against Katie Hudkins from a foreclosure back in 2008. A figure that large points to an absolutely astonishing level of financial disaster right from the very start. And just for some context, that massive judgment came after a notice of trustees sale was filed. That's basically the final warning shot in a foreclosure. It means you've defaulted on your loans and your property is about to be auctioned off. We're not talking about a small financial hiccup. This was catastrophic. And then you have this. Before they were business partners, before they were co-plaintiffs, they were on opposite sides of a domestic violence petition. Now, the case was eventually dismissed, but the fact that it was filed in the first place reveals a history of serious personal conflict long before their business empire imploded. So that brings us to today and the completely unresolved legacy of their partnership. What we're left with is this tangled mess of failed businesses, lawsuits that are still active, and a personal relationship that the courts are now trying to dissolve. But believe me, this story is far from over. So what happens now? Well, this is the truly wild part. Even as they're divorcing, their lives are still legally tied together. Those two big lawsuits where they're on the same side are still active. In fact, their case against the landlord is scheduled for a trial in June 2026. They're going to have to navigate these incredibly complex cases together as a team while simultaneously breaking up. And that really is the big question hanging over all of this. When a marriage and a business empire are this tangled up in lawsuits and debt and personal history, how do you even begin to pull the threads apart? Untangling this web is going to be a long, messy, and very, very public process.